to another channel update, although in all honesty this is more intended to be a kind of signing off of the year and to wish everyone a happy festive period, seeing as we are now well and truly in and amongst that. And initially the idea was that I would be able to record this a little bit closer to the time, but for the reference, I'm recording this 1 week exactly before Christmas Day, and that's because tomorrow I'm going to be heading home and I will not be taking my PC with me. Also, it doesn't really make any sense to do a live stream on Christmas Day now, does it, though? People have got much more important things to be doing, including me, weirdly enough. I do in fact actually want to spend time with my family this year, considering the fact that I have not been near home for most of this year. And as far as this update goes, it will be more of a reaffirmation of what I'm going to be doing in the early stages, and perhaps moving through 2022 as well, try and give people a little bit of an idea about where the channel is going to be heading in a more definite sense, and also where it could go based on some of the things that are a little bit more variable about next year. Obviously this year for me has been quite tumultuous, and while I usually I try to make the content as little about myself as I possibly can. It's one of the benefits of my channel overall, really. I think that really it is the content itself rather than me that is centre stage, and that's a good thing with regards to YouTube content. I think too many channels are about the actual personality themselves, and it often ends up being a little bit, the waters get a little bit muddied there quite often, I think. But irregardless of that, I will be going into a bit of the variability that next year could have and the impact that it could have on the channel. Although, don't panic too much, because at the very worst, the channel will simply continue as it has done throughout this year, basically. And there will be no change from your perspective. The only possible changes to the channel, I think, could be positive ones. And I do hope that that will be the case, but more on that a little bit later on. First and foremost, let me wish everyone a very happy Christmas and also a happy New Year. I hope that 2021 has been good for everyone here. Honestly, for me, from my perspective, 2021 has actually been a fairly punishing experience. It's been very tiring. As the year has gone on, actually, especially towards the latter stages of the year, it's been very disheartening as well. Not that that has come across in my videos too much, I think, but I've had a little bit of a hard time going into the final stages of this year, which is why I've sort of reaffirmed in my head what I will be doing next year, at least in some capacity. But yeah, I think 2020 was a year that a lot of people had a lot of trouble with. Honestly, for me, not too much. 2020 was more a sort of non-event than anything else. It was a little bit disappointing, but it wasn't actively difficult in the way that 2021 has ultimately been. Obviously, this has been as a result of me moving for my new job, essentially, which is not so new anymore, and it's certainly lost its luster a little bit in terms of what I'm actually doing now. For those of you who have obviously been in the employment world for any length of time, you kind of know when you're being taken for a ride by your employer and you're being taken advantage of. You're not getting as much as you should, both financially and otherwise, and they're quite content to keep it that way for as long as possible before you start to complain. But ultimately, that will be their loss in the long run. I won't go into too much detail about that, but irregardless, it's been a frustrating year from that perspective. It started off okay-ish, but it's been steadily getting worse and worse as we've gone on. Yeah, it's been that kind of year, unfortunately, and I'll be very glad to have, I think I'll have 2.5 weeks, basically, starting from today, when I'm recording this, through to the early stages of January, where essentially I won't have to worry about all of that. It'll be the longest amount of time I've had off since I started my new job, essentially. But enough about that. We'll be talking more about how that may be impacting the channel in terms of the choices that I'm going to be making towards the tail end of the video, I think. We'll start off with something which is going to be a little bit more immediate in terms of the upgrading, very necessary upgrading, I think, to my hardware, which will be happening probably around March time. I did want it to be in more sort of January, February, but I think I'm going to have to push it back just a little bit, just so that the financials on it make a little bit more sense. Because I do want to get a really decent sort of higher end machine if I can, just to make sure it's future-proofed for a little while. And I do need a completely new system as well, because some of the components that I'm using I've kept the same since sort of late 2014, early 2015. So yeah, it's about time that I did upgrade my computer a little bit. It does work just fine, of course, for Medieval 2, although even that with the Moria map has been a little bit of an issue lately, so that's something. But if I do intend to do stuff like Rise of Mordor, like I've mentioned, I will need to upgrade my hardware a little bit so that I can show it to the level of, to the standards really that I want to be able to showcase my stuff at. I don't really want to be showing things at a quality which is a little bit substandard, if I can at all help it. And then there's also the possible inclusion of stuff like Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord mods, which I've been going on about for a little while now, but that's again the sort of thing which I would want to be doing on a higher end system, just to make sure that everything is as good as it can be. With regards to Bannerlord as well, it's also the sort of content which I think is far better suited to live streaming in much the same way that Total War campaigns are, rather than this sort of episodic long form content that YouTube doesn't really like. It's much better to package that up into live streams, which again is the sort of thing which may make a return later on in 2022, depending upon how things go. Again, we'll have to wait and see. It is my intention to make that the case, but irregardless of that, it is what it is. Of course, Medieval 2 stuff like Reforged, and of course Silmarillion, which you're seeing in the background at the moment, a battle sent to me by Alexander 10Q, a pretty good one as well. In particular, it showcases how powerful the Mythern and Tolgalen can be from the forces of Assyrian going up against the Angband army. But yeah, those two, much less of a problem for the most part, and I'll be able to keep doing that content certainly until March, when hopefully I can get my new system. I mean, I am encouraged to get a new system essentially, because this does count as a secondary income for me, which means I essentially can get the hardware tax-free, or at least I'll get some sort of tax break from it. I mean, it's still going to be very expensive, of course, with computing parts being what they are at the moment, especially GPUs. It's not going to be cheap by any means, but essentially it's a choice of spending over £1,000 on myself for different bits and pieces, or give that money to the government. And of course, I'm going to choose myself every single time on that count. So that will be something that will be happening in the early part of 2022. As far as what the channel will be doing, I suppose we better get into that now. I mean, 2022, I do intend to move on from my current job at some stage in 2022. Whether that be the earliest possible moment I could do that would be March, although I would highly doubt that I would do it that early, because I probably wouldn't be able to have anything in place by that point. More likely, it's going to be around the summer, somewhere June, July-ish, where I intend to move from my current job to something else of some description. I have a few ideas on that count. Again, I don't want to go in too much into my own life and bits and pieces like that, but a PhD would be my first choice. But considering the rather niche aspect of what it is that I actually do, that may or may not happen depending on the programs that are available. Otherwise, I'll be looking to just move on to something else, whether it be some sort of marine labs job or something like that. Anywhere but here is my current mindset, essentially, because this place is no good to me, and I don't think that I could withstand another full year of being employed by these people. So that's essentially what will be happening. And as I've mentioned before, my current job is probably one of the worst that I could possibly have in terms of trying to maintain a YouTube channel, in that it is, because that element where I could at any moment essentially be gone for 3 weeks at a time means that I have to record in bulk ahead of time constantly in order to counteract that. Back in the summer of 2021, I did mention that I might have to go down to 1 video a week. In the end, that didn't end up being the case, because I was able to bulk record in a couple of sessions that was essentially meant I was able to withstand those 3-week periods where I was going away. And as the year morphs into winter, you're much less likely to be away for longer lengths of time, purely because the weather is not suitable for going out into the ocean. Even in the more shallow water work that my company tends to do, tends to not be good conditions. So oftentimes the winter period is mercifully a little bit quieter, which is why I've been able to record at a much better rate now, and I have managed to future-proof myself a little bit. I have managed to record basically all the way through until the late part of January at this point, so I'm over a month ahead of time, which should give me plenty of leeway and wiggle room, especially considering the fact that I would only, at most, I would consider 3 trips away before, or more than likely, I'm going to be moving on to a different job. It's not the being away at sea that really bothers me as such. It is the It's just the scheduling and also the fact that I'm clearly being taken advantage of in terms of the financial rewards, and the juice is not worth the squeeze, really. And I suppose that's to be expected. I mean, graduate jobs are what they are. You basically get what you're given initially, but by the time I leave, I will have more than a year's worth of industry experience and a master's degree, so they can essentially swivel on it because I can move on to something far better, and there's not really much to stand in my way of that other than myself. So that is what's going to be happening. How that will impact the channel, of course, moving on to something which is a little bit more, or a little bit less, I should say, punishing from a schedule perspective, means I'll have a little bit more time again, to a greater or a lesser extent, to actually put into my channel. Now, if that is a PhD, that won't be too much more time, in all honesty, because of the greater demands of what I'll be doing, in terms of, basically, while the day-to-day stuff for a PhD will probably be harder, but the fact that I won't be away for 3 weeks at a time and unable to do anything at all, it probably balances itself out to being slightly in favour of the PhD side of things. Also, this will become a little bit more necessary as well as a secondary income in that situation. So I'll be able to put a little bit more time into this again, and that would also be the moment where I'd intend for live streams to come back in some capacity. So that's something that it's more of a second half of 2022 thing, certainly. The first half will be much the same sort of thing that we have seen up until, well, throughout most of 2021, really, in the sense that the channel isn't really looking to expand in any way. It's in survival mode, really. But, we're just sort of maintaining what we've got and moving along like that. But yeah, that's basically the plan. In my current job, I will be pretty miserable, but the channel is one of the things that I do enjoy doing, so it's one of the things that will essentially keep me sane. And yeah, so at worst, the channel will maintain as it currently is, but more than likely at some stage next year, sooner or later, I will be able to go back to a schedule which was more similar to what I was doing beforehand, where I'm probably looking at 3 pieces of content a week rather than 2. That would be the idea, maybe a live stream a week in addition to the 2 videos that I'm currently doing. But it's by the by, really, because I'm only really able to talk about this from a perspective of it being further in the future, and plans are fragile things, especially when you're looking into the longer term. But I've been talking about this for a while, in the sense that next year I'd be looking to re-expand the channel a little bit, but I haven't really extrapolated on why that may be. This is why. A little bit more context. I don't usually like talking about myself and my life on the channel, because again, like I said, I prefer the content to actually be centre stage and not myself. But I feel as though it is important for context purposes, to reiterate what's going to be happening. Regardless of that, this has turned into a bit of a waffling affair, hasn't it? So we'll move to wrapping this up, I think. And for that, I will simply say that I hope you have a wonderful festive period wherever you may be in the world, and regardless of how good or bad your 2021 was, I hope that your 2022 will be even better. And I hope that you weren't put off too much by the fact that this was really more of a waffling affair, but like I said, I feel like the context with regards to where I plan to move the channel in terms of just how much content I'm going to be able to do is important, because it is greatly effective, really, by how next year goes for me in terms of my general situation in life. So yeah, I hope you'll indulge me just this once, because it's very rare that I go into this much detail on myself, but yeah, it is what it is. And it is a Christmas update video, I suppose, so it doesn't have to be quite so business-like as a lot of the usual content is, quite so regimented as I usually am on camera in this capacity anyway. It's not how I am in real life, I must say, as well. I'm very different, I suppose. Many people might be quite disappointed by the fact that I'm quite different in real life to how I perhaps portray myself in a lot of the replays. But yeah, it is what it is. Regardless, I hope you found this somewhat informative with regards to where I'm going to be moving the channel. And I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which, again, we'll be getting back into the replays as we move towards the new year.